Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris Wright. I'm a landscape photographer working out of Granada, Spain. Now, I'm back in Shropshire and I've just had the wettest holiday I think it's possible for a man to have. We ill-advisedly set off for Scotland in the pouring rain and proceeded to drive for, I think, 7.5, 8 hours in the pouring rain, not seeing very much at all until we got to our cottage in western Scotland, where it proceeded to continue to rain for most of the week with small intervals. However, I am absolutely delighted with the photography that I managed to get, and I wanted really to use this opportunity, seeing as we've skipped a week, to finish off, or at least to sort of come to some sort of conclusion on the topics of which I spoke a couple of weeks ago, namely the Ansel Adams zone system and how that can be not made to work, but how that can influence and how that can add to our photography in the world of digital photography. So let's get stuck in while the light is still here. It is literally pouring with rain less than 5 minutes ago, and I've grabbed the opportunity to come out here and talk in the open air. What we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, we went into a fair amount of detail about the possibilities of having a method for exposing our photographs that will give us consistency across a whole range of conditions. And we, of course, managed to test that in only one small sort of set of conditions, and it seemed quite satisfactory. And really the idea was to expose for the highlight in the scene and nudge it a stop or so closer to the white. And the theory is that this gives you an exposure where your what would be zone 7 in the Ansel Adams system, or zone 8, is fitted to the whiter things in your scene. So that would be typically clouds. It would not be the sun. The sun would be zone 11. And so you don't want to do that. What you're effectively trying to do is to protect the highlights and have them fall in their natural position in the photograph. And then everything else, in principle, should fall in behind that, going down through the zones towards black. Now, I found myself wondering after a couple of days, one of the things that I was really interested in was getting early morning sunrise pictures across the sea. So I had in my mind a scene where the sun's coming up, rendering obviously a very bright area in the sky, and giving me a reflection across the water, thus making that middle ground slightly more interesting. And the idea was to lighten up the foreground a little bit so that we could get detail in the foreground on the rocks where I was positioned. And I had this very clearly in my mind when I set off. So 5:30 a.m. I duly jumped out of bed on the first day, had a look out the curtains, and it looked favourable. It was a really nice, really dramatic, blue-tinged sky. The sun, obviously, at 5:30 hadn't come up, but the idea was to get out there and give it a go. And so that's what I duly did, and I was very happy with the result. But what happened next really caused me to rethink my views on the zone system. So effectively, what happened as the sun comes up is obviously it gets much brighter, and because we were shooting into the sun was really dominating the lighting of the scene. So turning that down, or using a filter to damp that down really simply resulted in sending the darks in the photograph into very, very deep dark indeed, and that wasn't really what I wanted. And neither did the bracketed shots deliver. So what I did was damp down the exposure until I could cope with the sun coming through the clouds. But that didn't give me what I was after. The shot wasn't quite there. And the only shot that really was quite there is clearly overlit in the clouds. You can see clearly in the picture that those whites are blowing out, and it led me to think, or it led me to re-examine my view, because I instinctively go to a point where I reduce and I protect those highlights. I don't want to see them blown out, but actually in the two pictures that I'm showing here, the one, to my mind at least, the one in which the highlights are clearly blown out is the better picture. And that's not simply to do with the framing, it's to do with the drama, and it's to do with the quality of the light in that picture. The colours come through much better. And I didn't find that to be the case when I bracketed the shots. Or possibly I could have worked it much harder than I did, but it seemed to me that the one that jumped off the page was the one that was slightly blown out. And so I make no apologies for including that photograph in this video. Now, the other interesting thing, of course, was the polar opposite, was the real sort of what would pass for a moonlight photograph is actually really, really crushed the blacks. And in fact, that, to my mind, again, adds quite a lot of drama to the photograph, and there is nothing to be gained, and I did try this, there's nothing to be gained by bringing those blacks up. What I normally do is bring the blacks up so I can see a little bit of detail in there. There's absolutely nothing to be gained in this particular photograph, because what we want to be looking at is the reflection across the water and going off into the distant clouds, and that gives it that sense of drama and that sense of completeness, if you like. It gives it the atmosphere that I was experiencing on that seashore on that morning. And so the conclusion I came to was twofold. One was slightly light-hearted, but did Ansel Adams ever take his photographs on the seashore at 5:30 in the morning? I'm not sure that I can remember a photograph by Ansel Adams showing anything much other than mountainscapes. And so that was, I am being slightly flippant there. Ansel Adams' mastery of exposure is far, far greater than mine, and so I'm quite happy to concede that. But it did make me wonder a little bit, because on that seashore, the lighting conditions are extreme. You have very, very bright whites, very, very dark blacks, and there was not a cat in hell's chance of getting that all into a single exposure. So we can have a look at those pictures here. These are a selection of pictures we've taken on the shore between about, I think, 6:30, 6:45, and 7:30. And you can see clearly, and you'll have your own ideas about which are the better pictures. I have a very firm idea of which ones I think are the better pictures, and it's the ones that have the drama. There's interestingly another picture, which is a much more sort of painterly picture that was taken in the afternoon in ordinary daylight, and the saving grace about this particular picture is that it was a very dramatic scene. The sea was doing what the sea does, splashing, and I took probably 35, 40 frames before I got everything to line up the way that I wanted it to. And this is a real benefit of doing this, shooting the sea. If you want to freeze the motion, then you need quite a rapid shutter speed and shoot lots of frames, because or try to anticipate what the sea is going to do. So what you tend to notice is there'll be a big splash about every 4 or 5 waves, and it goes in a cycle and it will come back. So you end up being quite patient, waiting for that sea to come in and waiting for the bigger splash that you can get there. So that was that. So of course this expedition involved me getting completely drenched, and and thanks to Ryanair, I was unable to bring with me anything except for the most unflattering waterproof garments that I think it's ever been my misfortune to wear. But wear it I did. It was totally necessary. So the next batch of photographs are from the island of Arran, looking out across the sound, across to the island of Arran. You get some wonderfully dramatic lighting if you're prepared to wait for it. So there's a variety of pictures here. Some of these are almost monochrome. Some of them are more obviously colour. They're all shot in colour. It's just simply the lighting conditions that give us the pictures that we've managed to get here. I did some black and white photography. This was quite fortuitous because I wanted to see the standing stones on Arran. There are standing stones that go back to, I think they've been dated around about 3,500 years before Christ. So pretty ancient, I think. And what I really wanted from these was the drama. And I know from experience of shooting this type of scene that what you really want is moody weather conditions, and boy did Arran deliver. We had weather plus, so I was able to shoot in black and white, or convert to black and white, and get some gloriously moody shots of the standing stones, and that was a real advantage. The third day or the fourth day, I think, I was extremely lucky to get a perfect end-to-end rainbow across the bay, and this was totally fortuitous. We had been out shooting, hadn't really got very much, came back, and there was the rainbow across the bay. So this is from the same perspective, a little bit further back as the shots showing the sunrise. And I was really pleased with this shot. I particularly liked the shot with the picnic table because it gives me an idea, it conveys an idea of human interference, if you like, with the nature, but there are no humans in the shot, just this completely deserted picnic table. And I like that. I think that gives me that makes for me for a much better picture than if there were people in the shot. And interestingly enough, getting the rainbow posed, I mean, it was very, very vivid to the naked eye, but it's actually surprisingly difficult to capture that vividness in a photograph. And so there was some tinkering with the individual colours of the spectrum of the rainbow in order to get the brightness and get the saturation that was very obvious to me in the naked eye and not at all so obvious in the actual picture. So that was that. So I think, returning to the Ansel Adams theme, what it seems to me is that I'm sort of admitting defeat in this point, because I'm realizing that I cannot get anything closer than a sort of warm feeling of, yes, I've got the exposure right, and that involves, generally speaking, not crushing the blacks and not blowing out the whites. But of course there are times when you want to do that, and there are photographs that are very well served by blowing out the whites, and I think I've come to the conclusion that that's okay. And it's kind of full circle for me, because that's one of the things that I always struggled with when I started photography, was blowing out the whites or crushing the blacks, and it was getting that in the middle area that it seemed to me to be a skill worth mastering, and I think I've pretty much nailed that sort of 25 years later. But there is an increasing realization that for creative purposes I might actually want to blow the whites out, I might want to crush the blacks, and I think that's okay. I think, and this comes right back to my theme of deliberation, because if you set out with your camera not really knowing what you're going to get, and you simply go to it in a spirit of taking advantage of the conditions that you have, you're always going to end up with some great pictures. But I find there's a real satisfaction in looking at the conditions and going, you know what, these conditions are perfect for that photograph that I wanted to take, which shows this kind of atmosphere. And that really, 25, 30 years into my photography, it's more than that. I went to university when I was about 25, studied photography there, and I'm just short of 70 actually. 70 is next May, not this May. I'm looking at 40 plus years of taking photographs, and I think with that, I'm not saying I've mastered anything, and actually in many ways I hope that I haven't mastered everything, because that gives me the opportunity to push on and carry on learning and carry on refining my craft. But the realization, I think, that in making decisions that break the rules for the sake of creativity is something that I think you have to have your chops in place before you can really do that successfully. And I'm inclined to be skeptical, because I think of the results of when I was a much younger photographer, going out and shooting loads and loads of frames and coming back and having one or two really great pictures. That really doesn't do it for me now these days, and much more I'm inclined to use techniques like focus stacking, to use techniques like stacking to get a range of exposures, and I'm inclined to really use the full range of the skills and the technology that are available to me in order to get the results that I get. And I think in the 20 odd photographs that I've shown in this video, you're looking at a whole range of techniques, and there are a couple of pictures in there that are technically less than perfect. There is one where the foreground is out of focus, and that's a real shame, I think, because that would really have benefited from that foreground being in focus. There is one where the highlights are blown out, and there's another one where the blacks are completely crushed, and the rest of them, the remaining 17 to 20 pictures are, technically good. They came out the way that I planned them to come out, and arguably it's all subjective. I can say which ones I like best, but I think the thing that sticks with me in all of this is this process of deliberation or visualization. I think if you have a view of what that picture is going to look like at the end of the creative process, and that need not necessarily be print, because so much of our stuff these days goes out onto the internet. But in Adam's time, this was very much a process that started with the vista in front of him. And it was all about exposing in order to get that processing to work, in order to get that printing to work. And I think the modern equivalent of this is quite similar. I think it's hugely beneficial to visualize and be deliberate about your photography with a view to getting the atmosphere and to getting the picture to look like the reason that you took the picture, if you like. What is it that I saw in this picture? What was the drama that I was responding to? What story is being told by these pictures? And I think for me, that is very much about deliberation. Now, what I want to do next time is probably to do one about taking that deliberate process through into processing, and then we're going to follow that up with another one, which will be several weeks later. I don't want to do this as a continuous series because I'll just drive everyone mad as one reason. But what I want to do is to have a set where we're looking at the various factors that ruled out Ansel Adams' decision-making process, and we're having a stab at trying to make that relevant to digital photography. And for me, that is all about deliberation, because without that, you're really just shooting and going, wow, you know, that turned out well, didn't it? And you'll be right more than half the time. But what I'm personally trying to get to, my own quest, is one where I can get to a sense of, I took every one of these frames on purpose because I knew that it was going to result in the result that it ended up resulting in, if that makes any sense at all. And what I have found through this, through really adopting this way of working, is that the number of keepers is much better. Although some of those keepers may be constituent parts. So there might be a focus stack where I'm obviously not going to keep all of the elements of the focus stack, only the finished image. But the number of throwaway shots is way, way less. Now, that being said, there were 2 shots, 3 shots that I missed that I really wish that I'd captured. And one of those was of a seal. When I was doing the morning shots, there was a curious seal that came and watched me. And at one point he sat up in the ocean right in front of me. And when I say right in front of me, I mean about 25 yards from me. And because I was working with a wide angle lens, that seal's head would have seemed like a dot in the picture, and so that was completely missed. And is the answer to take 2 cameras out with me? No, that would be way too much money for the accidental appearance of a seal, but it's a thought. Okay. As ever, it's been a pleasure making this video. I really enjoy the process of sharing my own thought processes, and I'm really surprised and yes, of course, gratified that so many people have responded so positively to these ramblings, because you know, that's often how they come out. But I think it's important to think, and I think thinking your way around a subject often reveals some truths and some insights that you didn't necessarily have before you started the process. So that's the way that I work. Okay, so if you've enjoyed it, if it's been interesting, do give us a like down below. Subscribe to the channel. That would be fantastic, and that would, the effect of this and the effect of the like is to ensure that the video gets out to the type of people that would be interested in listening to it, and those would be people that are interested in the process, that are people that are interested in the notion that the Ansel Adams zone system is applicable to digital photography, and it's about what the things are that we can take from that. So thanks very much for watching, guys, and we'll see you next week with another video, definitely. All right.